In this episode of the Neighborhood Money Podcast, we are going to talk all about UGMAs or UTMAs, what they are, what are the pros and cons, and how they are superior to savings accounts. Hello and welcome to the Neighborhood Money Podcast, a video podcast here to help you grow your financial knowledge and build a life you deserve. Drew, we're in episode 19 of the podcast, and today is all about UGMAs or UTMAs. But before we get there, man, how's it going over there?
It's going pretty good. Another week, another podcast. So pretty excited about this week with the UGMA and UTMA talk. I know it was last week we had a comment on one of our episodes, and it was to talk more about UGMAs and UTMAs. So I'm hoping we can talk through that. We want to let you know we are listening to these comments and we appreciate them, and hopefully we can kind of get rolling on these.
So Drew and I have shed the turkey weight, hopefully, and we're all ready to rock and roll and talk about UGMAs and UTMAs. But before we dive into the actual episode, we both want to say a huge thank you to all of you guys that are listening and supporting this podcast. In order to help this podcast grow, we ask you guys to do one thing. Please share this podcast episode to one other person if you find value in it, so that they can get value from the podcast as well. And if you're watching us over on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video, as that helps the algorithm kick it out to more people and get it in front of more and more eyes.
So I think we should start off the episode with the weekly trivia. I think it's been a fun little segment of the new Neighborhood Money podcast. So I think we can go ahead and start that one. The first trivia question is, what is the average net worth of an 18-year-old? So that will be a pretty interesting one to check out. And the second one here is, in 1964, what holiday classic first aired on TV?
It's the holiday season, man. I know in the Stackpool household, it's full swing. So had to definitely include a holiday trivia in this week's episode.
That will fit pretty nicely in this episode too, because in the What's Going On in the Neighborhood, I'm going to talk about two holiday movies I've never seen before and I finally watched. So it'll come right after the trivia, and I'm pretty excited to talk about them.
Awesome. So UGMAs and UTMAs, people probably are very familiar with the acronyms, but they might not actually have a clue of what they are or how to actually get started with them. So Drew, I think the first step really is to say, well, what does an UGMA and UTMA stand for? So they're two different custodial accounts, where your UGMA is your Uniform Gift to Minors Act and your UTMA is your Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. And while they're very similar in their nature, they are slightly different in the type of investments that you can have within them.
With the UGMA account, it's a lot more on the, I would say, on the investing side. So your normal stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc. They try not to do as much of the riskier investments. So when you've heard us talk about in previous episodes with investing on margin, you wouldn't be able to do that in these type of accounts. And the big difference with the UGMA and UTMA is the assets inside of it. So with the UTMA, you can actually transfer tangible assets. So say such things as fine arts or real estate.
So those are within the accounts, but who are these accounts actually for, Drew?
These accounts are for minors. So it depends on state, but most of the time you're looking at 18 and younger. And a lot of the times you're trying to think of what's a good way to give a gift to a minor that can kind of keep giving. And we've talked about, these custodial Roth IRA accounts, but you need to have earned income to fund these. So these UGMA and UTMA accounts are kind of nice because they're a way of giving your minor a head start on investing and still being able to gift them money, but it's more, you get more out of it than you would, say, a savings account, which is less than a 1% return per year.
And in addition to that, minors actually in the United States can't own stocks. So in order for them to get access to, say, the stock market, they have to have a custodial account like an UGMA, where an adult actually oversees or is the custodian of this account. And so being the custodian means ultimately that you oversee the account, you control the money, you control the type of investments the money is put into. But the actual money itself, once it enters into the UGMA or the UTMA, it is no longer the adults or whoever gave that gift. It is actually owned by the minor. They just don't have access to it until they become of age, of majority in whatever state that you are currently in.
Yeah, and also with these UGMA and UTMA accounts, even though they are a custodial account, if it was something that you're not very comfortable as in investing, There's also a opportunity to put on a limited agent, so like another custodian as say an advisor, and they could be the ones controlling the investments with inside this fund.
And there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to UGMAs and UTMAs. Some people can use it for saving for college, but there's also a bunch of other different ways that you can use an UGMA as long as it's for the minor. And we'll dive more into that later on in the episode. But it's really
Mhm.
an awesome account that gives you both flexibility, but also the ability to have higher gains, Drew, like you were saying, than your typical old savings account.
Yeah, one of the things I really do like about this is the flexibility. I know we've talked about 529 plans, which is investing for college, but sometimes college isn't for everybody. And it gives your kid an opportunity when he turns of adult age, depending on the state, to choose what he wants to do with that money, whether it is going to college and spending the money towards that, or if it's going to be using money towards some type of apprenticeship or some type of entrepreneurial type of activities, or just spending it stupidly.
And that and we'll get into it here in a little bit, but that is one of the cons is that it is their money and they can really use it however they want, even if it's something that you didn't want them to spend it on. But I think just to rehash exactly what an UGMA and an UTMA is, it is a custodial account that
Mhm.
you open for a minor. You put money into it, or whoever puts money into it. It's not limited to the number of people. And that money is actually the minor's money that then they get access to when they become age of majority in whatever state, which is typically 18, but can range from 18 to 25, depending on the state that you currently live in. So, Drew, what are some of the positives of opening up an UGMA or an UTMA?
Some of the top positives that come to my mind are being able to financially fund or gift minors. I think is kind of a cool idea. You see people transferring or giving money as gifts for holidays or birthdays, and this could be a good way to put that money and have it work better than just a savings account. The other kind of cool idea with these UGMAs is there's not really these contribution limits. So you can put in as much as you want to these outside of, there's federal gift tax, so about 15,000 for single, 30,000 for couple as the time of this airing. So outside of that, there's going to be some federal gift tax on top of it, but there's no contribution limit. So if you want to put in more than that 15 or 30,000, you definitely can do that, where a lot of these other type of investment plans for minors tend to have contribution limits, or even on your own 401ks or your own IRAs, they tend to have these contribution limits. So I think that's kind of another pro and kind of a cool thing with these is there's no contribution limits on them.
What about that money inside of the account? How does that get taxed? I know some of the accounts that we've talked about that are
Mhm.
out there are tax free, depending on what they're used for. What does the taxes actually look like within these accounts?
It's not as tax advantaged as you've seen with some of these other potential plans or funds out there, but up to $1,100, the first $1,100, it's not taxed federally. The next $1,100, you end up having to pay what they would call like a kiddie tax, or it's a lower tax rate being a minor. And then anything above that combined, so the $2,200 is going to be taxed at the custodian or parent tax rate. So it's not as tax advantaged, but there are some small pieces the earlier on where maybe you don't have those gains of more than like 1,100, 2,200, somewhere in that range.
If you've been listening to this podcast or other podcasts or just reading about personal finance, one kind of theme you'll notice is that for those tax advantage accounts, you have limited flexibility. And then the accounts that aren't as tax advantage or have no tax advantages provide you more flexibility. And this is really falling into that latter bucket of accounts.
Kind of those trade-offs. But I'd say probably one of the other top pros that I think that come out of this, talking with no contributions, to piggyback off that, you can have multiple people fund this. So it's not just a custodian that sets up these account that can fund this account. It can be brothers, sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever it may be. So it's not just strictly on one person's shoulders, where maybe you may have that in other type of more restricted plans.
One more that I have that that you didn't cover, Drew, is what we've already kind of touched on a little bit, but it's really access to the stock market or whatever kind of investments you want, whether it's stocks, bonds, CDs. Specifically looking at the stock market. Even if you just put this money into an S&P 500 index fund or ETF that on average gets you around 10%. That's considerably more than the 0.01% that you're going to get in a savings account.
I think something that would be kind of cool with this type of an account as well is if you were to if you wanted to take on the task of actually selecting the investments within inside this account, it would be a cool way to actually sit down with the miner that this account's for and have them and teach them how to be in the stock market, see how that works. So if you want to be savvy enough and actually take on the task of doing the investments yourself, I think it'd be a cool way to dip the miner's feet in the stock market and actually see how it runs and works instead of just seeing the dollar amount in the account, because that tends to be something you don't really get taught in high school and most of the time even in college. So
Right.
this would be just kind of a cool bonding experience and educational experience as well.
So I'm going to sit down now with my toddler tomorrow and walk him
Yes,
through the stock market.
exactly.
No, that's a really good idea though. Like obviously you can start these as soon as your child or a child in your life is born, but once they come to an age where they can start understanding some of these concepts, what a great idea to get them involved and better understand how money within the markets can make you more money and really understand what that compound interest is.
Yeah. So now that we've talked about a lot of good things, can you, on top of your head, really think of any negatives to these accounts?
Yeah, I think the first one that, gets talked about a lot when you just talk about opening up different types of accounts for minors is the impact to financial aid. While an UGMA definitely is going to impact financial aid, I think this kind of gets overblown a little bit, Drew. And the reason I say that is because as it does impact the amount of financial aid you're going to get, but that is far outweighed by the amount of compound interest you should earn over the course of your child's life, whether that's 18 years of investing or whatever it might look like. So while your financial aid might get decreased, or it will get decreased with this type of account, I guarantee if you're on the numbers, the compound interest is going to far outweigh that.
And it would be a nice feeling, financial aid is there and it's nice to have, but if you're in a position where you didn't need the financial aid and that could be going to other people that may have needed it, that's a pretty good feeling that you don't necessarily need the aid, that you'd be able to take care of it on your own.
I think another negative of an UGMA is that it's an irrevocable gift, meaning that as soon as you put money into the account, it is no longer yours, and the minor does own that money. So, for example, if you want to help fund their college expenses, maybe you open up an UGMA, and then once they turn age of majority, let's just say 18, like it is here in Minnesota, that money is theirs to use however they want, and you no longer have control on how it can be spent. So while you might have wanted that money to be used for education, they could just go and blow it all in the first year just doing, young, stupid things. Right. And so it's that's a real big negative to this type of account.
With the irrevocable, to some people, they could even look at that as a positive because once the money's in there, they are not tempted to take that money out for
That's a good
themselves.
point.
So
That's
if
a good
they end
point.
up coming into a bad situation in their life, or say there was some potentially bad gambling habits, or something where you're saying I need the money now, the money is gone, you can't go for it, so you're gonna have to find money somewhere else. So you almost are able to protect yourself from potentially dipping in and saying, hey, I'll pay it back later, and maybe you never do.
Another negative is that it is a taxable account, so you're not getting those tax benefits depending on what you're marking this money for. And then the last thing, UGMAs, the money within the accounts can actually be accessed before the child turns age of majority if it's used for them. However, the big negative then there is you can't actually use this money for any type of parental responsibilities. So you can't use anything in the UGMA for things like food, housing, or clothing.
So when we've talked about 401ks and not being able to withdraw till 59 and a half, or 529 plans where it has to be strictly for educational purposes, these UGMAs, they do give you that flexibility and you are able to withdraw, which is kind of nice where you're not getting penalized. I mean, some tax if you had earnings on it, but if for the most part, if you can withdraw money for, say, a laptop going to school or maybe even a vehicle, that's kind of a cool little area. But as a custodian, you can't say, hey, I want to get him shoes for the basketball season because those are under your parental duties according to the government or tax code. So those are things that you'd have to then take over yourself and make sure they get food, shelter, clothing.
So now that we know what these accounts in UGMA and UTMA are, Drew, how do we actually get started with using these accounts?
Yeah, as we've said in so many episodes before, it becomes with you actually sitting down and thinking through what your goals are going to be for this account. And if it's something on the lines of you want to do it yourself, then you can, go along and pick your investments, and hopefully it's just for the kid's future, or maybe your goals are it's for an educational purpose and you can kind of talk through your minor with that, or it's just, is UGMA even the right account for you? If are you strictly wanting it to go towards education, then maybe this isn't the right plan, because once the money's in, it can be, it's irrevocable. And once the minor turns of legal adult age per the state, then you no longer have control over this and they might not use it for education. So I think the first part, as we always say, is planning and just making sure you're getting into the account for the right reason.
One thing that when you think about like how to start planning if UGMA fits into the plan for your minor, one thing you could consider is cash gifts are given very frequently, right? And so typically that money is put back towards a child in toys or clothing or whatnot. But one idea you could do is just open up an UGMA for your own child, and any cash that they get over the years, you can funnel it into there, which
Yeah.
will help them have a jump start, whether it's for education or just for growing up and becoming an adult. It gives them a good head start in life, being 18 and all of a sudden having this good chunk of money available to them to use for however they want.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I know we talked about it in our last episode about the gifts that keep on giving. So instead of, tossing cash to your, whether it be grandchild or nephew, niece, or child, then maybe you just say, "Hey, here's a note saying I put it into this account. You're going to have this much money going into it, but I want you to be growing and do more towards the future." So I really think that is a cool idea of that's where your gifts can go, instead of something they grow out of in a year or a toy they stop using after a week. They can actually see this monetary value later on in life.
So my son has an UGMA set up for him that my dad actually opened up. And when my dad was trying to figure out what he wanted to do with money to help
Mhm.
him, what are the best types of accounts or what are the options
Yeah.
available to him to start funding? Because, if we go back in the day, it was very common to get things like CDs or just putting cash into a savings account.
Yeah.
And my dad was like, well, there's got to be something better. And so I brought up the idea of an UGMA, and the reason he really liked it is because it had that flexibility and it didn't
Mhm.
have to be earmarked for college education. It could be used for really anything that my son really wanted to use it for. And I'll tell you that it was a very easy process then for him to set up. He went through Capital Group, and
Mhm.
when he opened up the account, he was able to pick a couple of investments, a couple of mutual funds
Yeah.
that they offered. And once it's set up, it's just any time that he pumps money into there, it just automatically goes towards those investments that he chose based on the allocation that he'll assign to them when he opened up the account.
So you said it was Capital Group.
Yep.
Did they work with them on picking the correct investment vehicles, or was your dad pretty savvy in the stock market and knowing exactly what he wanted to pick? Or is he just kind of throwing darts at the wall?
Well, darts are no, definitely not darts. I know he did. I believe he spoke with at least someone from Capital Group, but then he talked with me around, what are some of the investment choices that might make sense, and going forward with, those mutual funds that are like more of those broad
Mhm.
based mutual index type funds that give
Yeah.
you pretty good exposure and not actually picking individual stocks.
Sure. Yeah, and I've looked around on the internet just to kind of see what the process actually is. I don't have one set up for my kid yet, and maybe it's something I might be looking into in the upcoming, months, but it was pretty simple. It was going out to your search engine, you're typing in opening an UGMA or opening an UTMA account. It gives you a bunch of options to pick out of, and they can be from brokerage accounts such as like Charles Schwab or Fidelity or TD Ameritrade, or they can be something even as simple as Wells Fargo. I mean, you might not think that the banks would be into these type of investment custodial accounts, but you actually can. I went on to Wells Fargo, I typed into their search engine, opening up an UGMA account, and They give you a couple links, you click on them, and then it gives you the options of saying, hey, do I want to be in control of this account myself and using their Wells trade, I believe it was called? Or do you want to speak with an advisor and then they can be that limited agent on top as part of a custodian on this, and they can make sure that your investments are going in their best interest, or I guess the miner's best interest. They have that fiduciary responsibility saying that they have to work in the account's best interest for the most part. So, but that obviously comes with a little bit of a fee. But if you're a little scared about going and picking stocks yourself or mutual funds or index funds, whatever they may be, there can be an advisor, somebody to help you through that.
It's okay to reach out to get help, whether that's your own CPA, your own tax consultant, or going to the broker and having someone from there working with you to really make sure that you're following all the correct rules, that you're setting your minor up to be successful, and that you're not going to have any negative penalties or taxes on yourself for any of these different types of accounts. So if you are in that boat where you need a little bit of hand holding, or if you need a little bit more help, that's definitely okay. That's why people, work in those types of jobs, to be there to help you to get those things set up appropriately.
It's definitely okay to do that because they're professionals at it. They're going to keep you compliant with it. It's going to be a little bit more comforting knowing that everything's going to be there correctly. So just being able to reach out to somebody is, I believe, just a really good thing, just because I always think don't know what you don't know. So when
Right.
you can talk to somebody that does it on a daily basis, they can ask you questions that you wouldn't expect to ask yourself, and that helps you with that planning process going forward.
So if we think about how the UGMA is a really good account for future savings or investing for a minor, what do you think, on a personal basis or your own opinion, obviously saying that this isn't financial advice, this is just media, just educational information, but what do you think are some good investment options that people could consider looking into inside of an UGMA account?
I mean, I wouldn't give any like specific ticker symbols or anything along that lines, but the way I would look at an account like this is I don't want to be very active in it. I want to do a set it and forget it. I would probably handle it myself and I would just go into some type of ETF that follows the S&P 500. I like those. Those tend to have exposure to a lot of different industries in the stock market and they tend to perform very well. So that's stuff I kind of would like to do, but it would definitely be putting money in and then letting it sit there, maybe keep an eye on it every year, see where it's at, see what products is in and making sure that it's performing. And then if it's still performing, I'd still just roll with it.
I couldn't agree more. I think an index fund and ETF, they're fairly synonymous, but having those broader based investments like an S&P 500 ETF or index fund, I think is an awesome idea for this type of account. You don't have to actively manage it. Those S&P 500 accounts are what they call self-cleaning. So if you have investments, if companies within the S&P 500 do poorly,
Yep.
they're going to bounce out of the top 500 and there's going to be new companies that come in. So
Yep.
they're going to be self-cleaning, but they also provide a reasonable rate of return. Like I said a little bit earlier in the podcast episode, you're going to get, roughly between 8 to 12% on average, around 10. That's a pretty good investment on just sticking it somewhere and then just letting it sit there. The only thing I will add to that though is if this account has less than 5 years until you're going to want to take out the money, or your miner's going to take out the money, you might want to reconsider putting all of your money into the equity markets, and maybe you find a more safe option, just because the market, even in those safer type S&P 500 investments, there's still going to be a lot of volatility on a year-to-year basis. And so if you don't have a longer than a 5-year time horizon, your choice of investment might be different than that.
And if you wanted something like a little bit more conservative like that, we've talked about them in the past. There's such thing as REITs, real estate investment trusts. So you're just trading basically real, tangible real estate, but in the stock market, and they tend to give out pretty high dividends. So if you wanted a high dividend payout, and then just have those constantly reinvesting into the stock that you're in, those are also a pretty good option. And the rate of return tends to be not like crazy high, but they tend to be pretty consistent as long as you can pick one that has a good business model.
That was a lot on UGMAs and UTMAs.
Yep.
I think, what is one of your main key takeaways based on this conversation?
I think a key takeaway for me is just picking a different gift for whoever you like to give gifts to. I think it's a cool way of not giving a toy or not putting money into a savings account. It's a way to get exposure to the stock market as a minor, and it's a way to have a better rate of return. I'm not huge on giving toys that they use for a couple weeks and throw away. I know for my nephews and nieces, I used to always give some type of practical gift, whether it be, I'm trying to think of what I would have gave them. It tended to be more on the clothes side, but it would be some type of a winter hat or gloves that they could use for a couple years. Or I think we've given a backpack one time. So there's stuff that they can use more than once. And in these type of UGMA accounts are just another way of making a practical gift to somebody that can continue giving even in the years in the time that you're not giving, which I think is pretty cool.
I really like that. I think opening up an UGMA just sets your child or a child in your life up for success when they become, an adult, and they can start their adult life way ahead of their peers. And
Mhm.
it's something that's not so fun during as you're giving, the gift of money towards his
Yeah.
account, but they're going to be very thankful when they turn 18, and they're going to say, "Hey, I've got this big chunk of money.
Yeah.
Like, I can use it for school. I can continue to invest into this account and then buy my house earlier than I wanted to, or just earmark it for further down the road, whatever they want." I think that's a really big takeaway. I think
Yeah.
another thing, Drew, is these accounts aren't that difficult to open up. They probably seem intimidating to a lot of people. So don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, I definitely understand that. But don't be afraid about it. Just go out and open it. Talk to someone at the company that you're thinking about opening up the account in. They're going to be more than happy to open this account for you. They're going to get paid doing it, right? So they're going to be there to provide the best service that they can. So just don't be as intimidated. It's not as difficult as you might be thinking it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. Just don't be intimidated. There's professionals out there, use them.
Let's get some of these trivia answers.
All right, are you reading or am I reading this week?
I'll read the question.
Okay.
And you give us the answer.
All right.
All right, question number 1. And this kind of tied into the whole UGMA conversation, just because age of majority is typically 18. So this is on average, right, what an 18-year-old would have. But the question is, what is the average net worth of an 18-year-old?
The average net worth of an 18-year-old is $5,000.
And just think how much more that could be by setting up an UGMA for your loved one.
It could be a lot more, even if it was $20 a year or $100 a year, and then that starts compounding on top of each other. You could be above the average for 18-year-olds with this type of an UGMA account if it's done correctly.
Much higher above the average. All right, question number 2, Drew. On this date, so December 6th in 1964, what holiday classic first aired on TV?
The answer is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Do you know if that's the one that looks like they're a bunch of puppets, or
It's got to be. I mean, it's from the 60s, right? Like
I don't
the
know.
beginning animated TV shows were all like that puppety looking.
I'm too young. I don't know any of this stuff. Wait, I remember that. I always think of that puppet one and that Santa Claus. He just always sticks in my mind. So I'm thinking it's probably that one, but I could be wrong. As I was saying earlier in this episode, I was happy this one made it in for trivia, and that's because this will sneak into our what's going on in your neighborhood. And this week, I, for the first time, watched the original Annie and The Sound of Music. I don't know if those are necessarily holiday or Christmas movies, but they seem like old classics that I should have seen and I just never saw. And I have to say, I was pretty impressed. I liked them both. They're both more of a musical movie, but I really enjoyed it. I was on the edge of my seat, and a lot of the songs ended up being stuck in my head, and I've been singing them to the baby.
Not gonna lie, I'm pretty sure I've never seen Sound of Music from start to finish. So
It's long.
you've got me beat there.
It's pretty long. We were an hour and a half into it, a little bit later at night after the kid was just being put down to sleep,
Ooh.
that is. And
Jeez.
and Jordan goes, "We're not going to finish this tonight." I'm like, "What are you talking about? It seems like it's just finishing up." And I pressed the pause button. It was only halfway through. I'm like,
Oh my
"Holy
God.
moly, there's a whole other half of this." But
Yeah.
I watch it. I was quite impressed. And then I ended up looking at who the cast members were, and I didn't realize the main character that was the same one in Mary Poppins, and then as well as those Princess Diary movies. And I didn't know that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then the guy in it was like the old guy in Knives Out in that newer movie. And that guy was quite the hunk back in the day. I ain't gonna lie.
Movie, media, culture, whatever. I'm like the worst at. I am awful with actors and actresses' names. I actually don't watch a whole lot of movies or anything like that. I watch Friends basically on repeat. So
We'll have that in the background every once in a while.
yeah,
You can't beat Friends.
you really can't. So I guess, Drew, to keep it in the theme of the holidays, like I said, the Stackpool household is in full swing for Christmas. And actually, so this last week, I got our Christmas lights up out on our house, and our house has kind of like four peaks. So we have a peak above our garage. We have two peaks on the second floor above the chill or above our kids' bedroom. And then
Okay.
there's a big peak at the very top. And I kid you not, I scaled that thing to the very tippy top of our house and put the lights up. So we had all the peaks. And I'm going to be real honest, there's a brief second there where I thought this might be my last Christmas ever because the peak is just like straight down. So if I had one slip of the foot, it might have been game over for me.
So is your house lit up like the movie Vacation? Or no?
No.
What's that? Is it National Lampoon's is it Holiday Vacation or what the heck is that one?
Christmas Vacation, right?
Christmas Vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not quite. I've been really trying to get Hannah to get the big blow ups in the yard and having all the lights to music, but
Mhm.
she's just not on board yet.
I wouldn't be on board either. I'm not a huge fan of Christmas lights. I mean, they look kind of good. Sometimes we'll drive around and look at them, but growing up, I'd go out and help put up lights with my dad, and we'd always wait till there's snow on the ground.
Yeah.
And all of those lights, and they wouldn't stretch because those lights in cold weather
Yep.
tend to not move at all. And then you'd put them up there, and then there'd be a section of lights that weren't on. So then you'd have to take them down, either find out what bulb it was, or go and get some more light bulbs. So I've never been a huge fan of the Christmas lights. So I'm kind of glad we don't do much. We kind of have a little bit by our front door, a little bit by our garage, but they're up all year round, and they look good at
Nice.
holiday season. And they don't look out of place outside of holiday season.
When your son's a little bit older, that thing might change because I know our boy loves to go look at holiday lights. And so we've got to have him on our house too. Otherwise, it's just not fair.
You can put them up, gonna put them up on a harness and just start pulling them up to the roof.
Yeah,
be
teach him
pretty good.
young.
Is there snow down by you right now?
Nope, we have no snow.
You
So
you're seeing grass?
the grass is still green in this lawn.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
We've had snow on the ground for like 3 weeks up here.
Nope, it is green grass.
Take pride in that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, awesome. I'm glad you guys are in the holiday swing of things. We got our tree up, but that wraps up this week's about UGMA and UTMAs. And if you're still looking for a gift for the holidays, don't be intimidated. Go open up an UGMA for that minor. And we appreciate you listening to this episode, and we will see you guys next week in the neighborhood.